Well, that's enough of that dramatic intro. Well, I've actually got a really great video for you guys today, going over all the specifications, all the unique titles for each console, the price of each console, and lots more, so you guys can get a rough idea on which one you prefer and why you prefer that console. So the first main point I want to talk about, because a lot of these spec videos are already out there, I want to actually talk about the looks of the consoles. So we've got obviously the PlayStation 5, which with this crazy white spire design, as I like to call it, and then we've got the Xbox Series X, which just generally is an Xbox. It's just a box with kind of like an indent which goes downwards on the top and the bottom. So that's a really nice feature, and I wanted to kind of talk about which one of these looks the best in my opinion to start with, because that's the first thing you see when you see these two consoles. Now the PlayStation itself has that amazing kind of white design, which actually is going to be covering up a lot of the fans, which is really nice. You won't actually see where the fans are, whereas on the Xbox they are exposed on the top and you can kind of see them. But the PlayStation itself, in my opinion, with the disc drive, doesn't look as good with the PlayStation without. So there's two versions of it, and for those wondering, yes, you can lie down the PlayStation. It doesn't have to be a straight up tower if you haven't got room for it, because that is a general concern as well. When you buy a console, you need to know roughly how much room you've got in the area. Can you fit the console in the area, or are you going to have to put it on the floor or somewhere away from the actual TV that you're going to be playing the console on, or monitor? So that's something to consider. The Xbox definitely seems a little bit smaller, but it's more bulkier. So generally speaking, if I could pick between these two on looks, I actually prefer the PlayStation without the disc drive, so the digital version. But if it was to pick between the two with the disc drive, I would go with the Xbox. It's just a more kind of slick design. It looks a lot nicer, and it really does kind of go quite well. Now, the really good thing about the PlayStation, in my opinion, is the blue lighting. I love that design. Just imagine seeing that in the corner of your room or something. It kind of looks a bit like a PC, but it gives it that really unique design and unique feel. Now, again, I am an Xbox player and have played an Xbox for a very long time, and I've also owned PlayStations. So my opinion on both of these consoles is just perfectly flat. So that's what I'm going to go through with the rest of the stats as we go through. But let me know in the comments, guys, which one you prefer on looks only, PlayStation or Xbox. I'd like to know. Let's try and not cause a console war in the comments, please, because that's not the aim of this video. The aim is to educate you on which one you personally prefer. Now, some general topics I want to talk about is obviously the specs. There's actually some surprising stuff in the specifications which gives each console its own advantage, and we're going to get into that more towards the end. The most obvious things when picking a next-gen console comes down to the actual games that are on the console, the looks of the console, the price of the console, and obviously, do you need a disc drive or not? So we're going to address them topics really quickly, starting with the games on the console. So we have numerous exclusive titles coming to both the PlayStation and Xbox side of the next gen consoles. Starting with the PlayStation side, we have a brand new Ratchet and Clank game, a brand new Spider-Man game, supposedly. Anyway, we're not 100% sure if it's going to be a DLC or not. And we also have a very classic game which a lot of people will enjoy, which is obviously Sackboy's Adventures. This is obviously going to be really cool, a big adventure, and it's going to be really awesome to actually see him back, obviously from the classic Little Big Planet, for anyone wondering about that. Then on the Xbox side, we have all of these titles on screen, with the most noticeable ones in my opinion being obviously Halo Infinite, Gears Tactics is already out on Windows 10, and a few others on there as well. So the most interesting thing about the Xbox side of stuff though, which does worry me a little bit, is the actual Windows 10 exclusive, because obviously if you own a Windows computer or just a PC in general, you can play a lot of the Windows 10 games, which is interesting because Halo Infinite is actually confirmed in the YouTube description to be a Windows 10 exclusive as well, which means it could be PC playable. Obviously that would make a huge game change for the PlayStation 5 and give it its little bit of an advantage there on the games, because you could still buy a PlayStation and still play Halo Infinite. You have obviously a Windows 10 exclusive PC type thing to run them sort of games. So that's really awesome, obviously for PlayStation users out there as well, if you're a Halo fan or if you're just generally considering getting the PlayStation. So Xbox definitely need to bump up their ideas. So what else do we have? Like I said, obviously the looks of the console is key. I gave you my opinion earlier on saying that the PlayStation looks better without the disc drive, but if you had a disc drive you'd get the Xbox side of stuff, and that leads on to obviously the disc drive topic. Is that a major concern for you? Because price is also involved with that. Generally speaking, guys, for those that don't already know, if you have a disc version of the game is a lot cheaper than the digital version. Again, you can game share on Xbox. I'm not too sure about PlayStation. I don't know if that's an actual thing, which could technically can cut the price of the game down by half. But with a disc, you can share it with your friends. So it's an interesting topic there. When the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 were announced, I know a lot of people were talking about disc usage, and everyone was complaining about the Xbox One kind of removing the disc and not having that sort of vibe going. And there was a lot of controversy around it. I can't remember the exact story, but it really hit Xbox hard. Quick side note regarding that controversy we saw, this clearly hit Xbox really hard because you can clearly see overall PlayStation 4 outsold Xbox by miles, and same with Nintendo Switch. Now, does that mean more people are going to move over if the Xbox has slightly better specs than the PlayStation, which we'll get into in a minute? Does it or does it not? I'll explain it in a second. I generally don't think people will be switching. Most PlayStation 4 users will probably stay with the PlayStation 5. We've obviously got the controller to talk about as well. We'll get into that. But the last topic I want to mention before we get into the specs is obviously the price of the console. So the estimated price currently is $500 for both of these consoles. Generally speaking, from the specs, which we're going to get into, the price of the PlayStation should be slightly more because the parts are a little bit more expensive from what I can tell. Then obviously on the Xbox side, it should be a little bit cheaper. Are Microsoft going to reduce the price to try and beat PlayStation? I don't think they would, which means you would have to pick between these two obviously in the shop. Now there's also rumors for a smaller version of the Xbox Series X being the Xbox Series S. Here's a picture of that for those wondering. That would definitely be cheaper, and that would definitely undercut PlayStation and allow for a little bit more extra sales right there, because the specification in that isn't confirmed. It's not confirmed at all, but it's rumored, and if that was real, the specs would be a lot lower inside of that console. Generally speaking, the PlayStation console and the Xbox are really cheap for $500. I do generally think they're going to be more expensive than that, because the amount of parts in these, if you were to build a PC with these parts, you'd be looking at $1,000 plus. So definitely something really interesting to consider right there. So here is a picture of all of the specs for both of the consoles right here. Now I'm no spec nerd, but I've been researching a lot. I've spent about 6 to 7 hours researching this video, and it's quite obvious that the Xbox does have the advantage overall with the specification. Now, generally speaking, the only reason it has the advantage is because it's got a more powerful CPU. Now, to explain this a little bit further, basically the difference between these is generally when there's more workload, the Xbox is going to be able to cope a little bit better than the PlayStation 5 because it's got a 3.8 gigahertz, whereas the PlayStation has got 3.5. This also takes into account cross-platform games. If we're playing a cross-platform game on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, you can expect it to drop down potentially to 3.3 gigahertz on the PlayStation 5, with the Xbox staying roughly at 3.6 or even 3.8, then you can expect a 15% difference in performance right there. Very unnoticeable though, because the GPU will kind of counter that, and it will be almost so hard to notice. It would have to be an extreme workload on the console and almost impossible for anybody to notice, but there will be people testing, and it does come down to how the developers develop their game as well. Then also a little noticeable thing as well, which will kind of make the PS5 a little bit better on the CPU side of stuff, is Xbox have confirmed most of their new games coming to the Xbox Series X are also coming out on the current Xbox One X, which would mean that their specs for the CPU will be a little bit lower because they're kind of cross-platform games, whereas the PlayStation 5 exclusives are solely for the PlayStation 5, and they would be taking their maximum capacity for that CPU, meaning they would have a better performance overall. So that's just because they're newer titles built for that. But if Xbox goes ahead and build titles just for the Xbox Series X and not for other cross-platform games, they potentially will be greater than PlayStation 5 games. Then it does come down obviously to the GPU. You can see the stats for that right there. Again, the Xbox does outperform the PlayStation in the GPU side of stuff. Tables start to turn towards the PlayStation as we get into the actual memory side of stuff. So you can see they're both using 16 gigs of GDDR6 there, which is really nice. Then the memory bandwidth is very similar as well. For those wondering, that's 10 gigabytes there on the GPU and 6 gigabytes on the CPU, and PlayStation just uses it across the whole console. Again, that doesn't really affect too much at all because it kind of equals out at the same score anyway if you work out the average of it. So you've got nothing really to worry about right there. But what the most noticeable thing is when it comes down to this SSD side of stuff. So you can see that the PlayStation's SSD is slightly lower than the Xbox on storage for your console, but What's really interesting about this is the speeds. Look at the PlayStation speeds. They are so much faster than the Xbox speeds right there. They're coming in at 5.5 raw and 8 to 9 compressed, whereas the Xbox comes in at 2.4 and 4.8 compressed. This means that PlayStation could actually render in load times and assets, etc. a lot more faster. It includes loading screens. That common clip we're seeing with people changing between games on Xbox being about 4 seconds instantly from one game to another. We could potentially see it even faster on the PlayStation side. That's maybe why GTA 5 was used on their launch trailer on their live side of stuff, because even the render times or the load times on that could be extremely faster than they are on the Xbox side of stuff. So that's a very interesting point there, and it kind of gives PlayStation the advantage on that side. So you've got potentially better processing speeds on the Xbox One X, but faster load times on the PlayStation 5. Obviously, better processing speeds could mean potential better frame rates, etc. But on the PlayStation, then faster render speeds could generally mean you could load into the game faster. So it's going to be almost impossible to notice the difference between these. Just note as well, both consoles are also going to be running at 120 Hz, which is going to be 120 frame rate FPS for those wondering about that. However, when looking into this a little bit more, we can potentially see that the Xbox could outperform the PlayStation on the GPU side of stuff, being 25% to 30% performance boost over the PlayStation, which would be really interesting. Also, it generally looks like the Xbox itself is going to be more suitable for the current 9th gen resolution standard. This is due to its split on memory, because obviously that's going to help on that side of stuff. This is obviously with the split on the 16 gigs of GDDR6, as I mentioned earlier. So some interesting points to look at right there. But just generally thinking, this side of stuff, the PlayStation definitely looks more future-proof than the Xbox, just because of them faster hard drive speeds with the render times, etc. And you are able to actually add in extra slots for the NVMe SSD slots. They are 100% going to be really expensive compared to the Xbox expansion card, because the technology used in these SSDs, which are on the PlayStation side, is a little bit more advanced than the Xbox side. That's why you're getting them faster load speeds, etc. But generally speaking, it all comes down to the developers. For example, look at Epic Games showing off their Unreal Engine 5. They've been showing that off recently, and it looks amazing, and that's on the PlayStation side. Generally, we are not going to be able to tell the difference between these two consoles. It's going to be very, very difficult, and it really will come down to how developers work their game and work their code around each game. Now, moving on to the controller side of stuff, we can clearly tell that PlayStation does have the advantage here because of the brand new haptic feedback, which is giving brand new vibrations on the controller for different surfaces. For example, if you're driving a car over some rubble, the vibration may change entirely, much more than the standard vibration we currently get. Adaptive triggers will also give different tensions. For if you're firing a bow, for example, it'll be a lot harder to pull the trigger back than if you were driving a car. Then also we have the motion sensors as well put into the control, which is really unique as well. This could potentially also be used for car games potentially, or just general motion with the control. We also have the pad in the center, which I assume will be touch screen again type thing, like it is on the PlayStation 4. I guess that will be the same on this controller. When it comes to the Xbox controller, I generally think that in general, it's more comfortable, in my opinion. I prefer holding the Xbox controller. I know it's kind of annoying because you've got the sticks are a little bit slanted. You've got the one on the right and the one on the left, but it definitely feels more comfortable. If I'm going to pick between them, I'm going to pick the Xbox controller. But I do want to try out the brand new features on the PlayStation controller. It definitely seems very interesting and could make people sway towards that if they want to kind of get a unique controller experience. Most people may use third-party controllers though, like Scuffs, etc. I don't see them using the features that the adaptive controller has for the brand new PlayStation 5. So if you are someone that uses paddles on the back, maybe PlayStation will bring out an exclusive one. I don't think the other brands that do controllers will actually have them unique features in straight away, in my opinion anyway. Then again, developers have to choose to actually apply them features to their game. Some development teams may not do it, and they may just leave it the same as it is on Xbox. So you may not even get them unique features anyway. You may only get them on PlayStation 5 exclusives. So the controller for the Xbox itself hasn't changed at all really, other than it's kind of changed a little bit of a shape, different look a little bit. But the most unique thing about this controller is it can be used on any previous Xbox One consoles. So that's quite cool. And also for those wondering, you can use previous Xbox One controllers on the brand new Xbox Series X. So that's really interesting right there. Now, coming to my conclusion, I just want to thank everyone who's made it to this point in the video. If you have, comment down below at the end with a little smiley face. You can make it unique, but yeah, just comment that down below and I'll be going through the comments to see who've made it to this point. And if you haven't subscribed, I'll be keeping you up to date with all gaming news regarding Xbox versus PlayStation as we lead up to their launch in summer. Okay, my conclusion, which console will I be picking? Great question. So I'm coming at this from 2 points of views. One from someone that doesn't own Xbox or PlayStation, and my own personal opinion. So let's start with the first point of view. This is someone that doesn't own either of these consoles, and you've got to consider which one to buy. First off is price. If your budget is much more bigger, then you probably want to go with the one without the disc drive on the PlayStation side of stuff. It looks amazing, it's really cool, and you get the Spider-Man exclusive. The specs are pretty good. As we know from the charts which I've just gone over, in theory the Xbox should slightly outperform the PlayStation with its CPU and GPU on performance, meaning it could get a higher frame rate in very difficult situations where the consoles are struggling to process the situation. However, as we know, the PlayStation has a better SSD, which would mean the PlayStation should actually have faster load times and faster load times between each app if you've got multiple games open. One thing I didn't consider in today's review was the interface of each console. We don't exactly know how the interface is going to look 100% on the consoles, so that's why I didn't consider it. But like I was saying, I would probably go for the PlayStation with no disc drive if I was picking one right now from scratch and never have played either both of these. Now, because I'm a huge fan of the Halo series and I currently own the Xbox One X and all my account and processes over there, I'm going to stick with the Xbox personally, just because of that. It just works better for me and there is a slight better chance of getting a better performance on the Xbox regarding frame rate. Other than that, we know between these two consoles, they will consistently battle out in the future and they will keep consistently overtaking each other. Just like we saw with the current gen we're on, we saw the PlayStation Pro come out and then the Xbox followed with the Xbox One X to overtake that and become the current most powerful console. Again, we don't 100% know how the specs are going to perform regarding the SSD drive on the PlayStation side. If it's going to make a huge difference, Xbox definitely will fight back with a better console, slightly better than PlayStation. And if the CPU is going to work better on the Xbox side, PlayStation might fight back with a better console. It's going to be a really interesting battle and I can't wait to see who is going to win it and how it's going to continue throughout the next gen. If you want to keep up to date with everything like that, make sure you smash subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, guys.